I can sound like a bad guy, but I find bad Christian art so offensive. And I think part of it is like we have this like litmus test that is oh, if it's consecrated to Jesus, it's immune from criticism. It's inherently okay. When we're not even interrogating the question of, is this honoring? Is this honoring to God by being its best? And is it honoring to our humanity by reflecting it? And I kind of am of the opinion that even if somebody doesn't understand the language necessarily, they should be able to look what we do and it passes the litmus test of being good art.
Well, Joshua, a very special welcome to the Sowers Podcast. It is a real treat and a gift to have you on the show. So a special welcome to you.
And thank you for having me, Matt. Excited to be here.
I would love for you. I've become familiar with your music more recently, have been really, really appreciating it. God by his Spirit has been speaking to me through it, which is probably the dream of every writer. But start with us at the very beginning, Joshua, where your own story began of coming to know Jesus, of the gospel being sown in your life, and then take us on the journey to music.
Yeah. So I've lived in Canada for 99% of my life. I was actually born in the States. Both my parents are American. So my dad actually grew up in an Orthodox Jewish home, also a very broken home. He's the only Christian in his family. He became a Christian, was kind of disowned for a while. And then my mom grew up in the Bible Belt. She grew up in Arkansas, and they met in college. They had me in Texas when my dad was in seminary. So I was born in Fort Worth. We lived there till I was 3. And then we moved to Saskatchewan. My dad took a pastoring job there out of seminary. And for me, like, I actually don't remember not knowing Jesus. You know, I think a lot of people's stories is you know, I grew up in a Christian home, but then I kind of piggybacked my parents' faith, and then I made it my own. And obviously it deepened and grew over time and years and understanding just the way I did. But like, I don't remember a time where it wasn't real, where it wasn't, like, it's never been going through the motions. I grew up Baptist, so like not a Pentecost background, but my parents were telling me stories of like interceding from my like high chair for people and stuff. And I think like, it's funny, I'm not a reformed guy. I wouldn't classify myself that way, but I can't deny the fact that like his grace predates my memory. And that's humbling, and I'm grateful for it. So yeah, so that was childhood, was being a pastor's kid. My dad's actually also, before he was a Christian, he was a professional illusionist. And so I had this really weird childhood where, you know, he was doing a church plant during the year. In the summers, we would tour all over the States doing his show. He took us all with him. And at like a lot of large conferences, that kind of thing, big stadium things, sometimes in churches, sometimes in businesses. It was a little bit of all that. But yeah, so experienced road life, not as a musician, really young. And I actually wasn't musical. So I was, I would say I had a faith understanding that I can't claim any credit for, growing up and just being like, I don't understand why this just completely clicks with my being. And then I took piano lessons as a kid. I hated it. I didn't see the point, but I was a complete book and film nerd. Like, I was just like, I loved narrative. I loved story. I kind of saw the world through that lens in a lot of ways. And then in high school, we moved to Cochrane, Alberta, for my dad to work at the seminary there. And that was where it was kind of just as I was hitting high school, I found a youth group where I had my faith that was my own, but I wouldn't say I had like much of a community of faith as a kid. Like, I felt like none of my friends really had the same kind of heart for Jesus. And then I ended up in this youth group where like, oh, now I feel this kinship with all these guys who also are on fire and want to know him deeper. And at the same time, discovered music and took some guitar lessons, fell in love, started playing in worship teams, immediately started writing songs. So I just thought that's what you did. I was an angsty teenager who wanted to get all my feelings out and all that kind of thing. And it just kind of snowballed from there. But I think as, you know, like, you know, the formative years of high school and really starting to discover, that was when I started to, I think, discover more Christian literature, you know, like Lewis and Chambers and those kind of people who were really starting to inform my faith. At the same time, I was having an expression of it through music. So it was like you have this input and then an outlet too. And it was beautiful. And so that was kind of the journey early on. And then out of high school, went to Australia for a year. I went to Hillsong International Leadership College to do worship stuff there. Really kind of my first time living out of the house and opening up the world to me. Went back to Canada and came to Briarcrest. That's actually where I met your brother, Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
And so majored in biblical studies there with a minor in worship arts, knowing I wanted to do music and I wanted to do ministry, but like basically being like, I've got a lot of practical experience on the musical side. I want to be like as scripturally informed and saturated a songwriter and worship leader as possible. Really benefited from my time there. And then ended up in an internship in Alberta, which then led me to a camp in BC, which then led me to where I've been since. So I've been in BC since 2016, first in Kelowna at my first local church, which is also where I started releasing music for the first time. And then a church in the Lower Mainland, a very large one, and now at a still large but smaller one in Chilliwack, BC.
Take us on the journey of music writing, songwriting, where your journey began. I mean, you spent some time at Hillsong, and
Yeah.
certainly people, if they're familiar with broadly Western Christian worship music congregationally, will be very familiar probably with many songs
Mm-hmm.
from Hillsong. But as I listen to your music now, this isn't to you know speak negatively of Hillsong or congregational music, but your songs and the songwriting and the lyric writing go to a place, as we were sharing before I jumped on here, that's almost lamentation like, that is
Yeah.
honest. Reminds me, as if I'm reading any of the wisdom literature, or I'm
Mm-hmm.
reading Lamentations. I mean, it's just taking me to a different place. I mentioned Chad from King's Kaleidoscope earlier, who I think has a similar taste in saying, hey, what I'm writing is probably not what you'd consider modern congregational music. Or you're probably familiar with The Glorious Unseen.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, it was writing, they were writing music that again didn't necessarily kind of fit your traditional category. So take us
Totally.
on the journey of what has brought you kind of to where you are now, as far as the type of music that you're writing that focuses on biblical themes, but doesn't necessarily fit the traditional mold of like a
Yeah.
congregational ballad.
Totally. Yeah, like most things, the road isn't always straight. It's funny because like when I was in high school, worship music was for sure a thing, but the genre that it has taken on now wasn't nearly as established in terms of like, these are the expectations for sound, for like what you are and aren't allowed to use imagery wise and that sort of thing. Like we were kind of coming out of Vineyard into like the like earlier Passion era, where even Passion wasn't defined, where Crowder and Tomlin were kind of both there. And they were kind of like, especially Crowder, like he was a huge influence on me in high school, and he did whatever he wanted, really. Like he would genre bend. He would use words like indelible in a worship song and
Right.
all that kind of stuff. Like, and the music video for that song was like a cartoon of like squirrels fighting a giant Voltron robot. Like it was like, it was just like this. And so I thought like, oh, there's like really like, you're only kind of like limited by your imagination. But then I found um really like, I think I kind of thought I'll just write what I write, and sometimes it'll be congregational, sometimes it won't. And then as time went on, especially when I was at my last church, I found there really are expectations for what will or won't sing in a room. And I used to kind of go, okay, I want to toe the line of like, some churches can sing this, some can't. And I think as I started really like in that church, I did write specifically congregational songs, right? They were still me in terms of like, I can't help but go to some of the imagery that I do, and lyrics kind of always come first. I think even when I was at Hillsong, I started realizing that maybe my tendencies in lyrics were unique. People started kind of going like, whoa, this is different. This is not what we're expecting. And I got a lot of encouragement and affirmation in it. But then in a congregational setting, it's like, okay, we want, it is really like arena pop rock. That's like kind of the vibe. And so I basically decided, okay, I can write songs that are congregational, that are meant to like serve in this area. And hopefully they can be formative in the way that I want them to be. But then I'm going to, from my stuff that I put out on my own name, I'm just going to completely take those considerations off of it and just approach it more as like, whatever you want to call it, devotional music that is prayer. But I think like I need art to resonate with what it means to be fully human. And I think what is really hard for me about a lot of what exists in the Christian space art-wise, and that's not just music, that's movies, all this kind of stuff, is that I'm not against art having some form of utility, like that it's designed to like help give a message. Actually, I think like what I do is very utilitarian in some ways, but that you can't compromise the art. You can't compromise the vehicle. The vehicle is not an afterthought. And it's really important that it comes to a place where it, like, I don't know, like I think we don't choose to live into our humanity, and we associate humanity with fallenness too much when it's like our God became one. Our God became a human, and he lived the full spectrum of humanity. And I think actually scripture gives us the full spectrum of humanity in our worship, in our being. And we've put some guardrails on it that actually I think are detrimental to our formation. And so I think art can actually be an invitation out of that, to what he has for us. And I always say like that for me, I think my music is intended to respond to who Jesus is across the spectrum of human experience and live into that humanity, but without betraying reverence or hope. That honesty doesn't require you to deconstruct. Honesty doesn't require you to abandon faith orthodoxy. You can do that still from a space of tension, still from a space of like, I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I know you do. I can't even feel it in this moment. But I think one of the greatest blessings I've gotten is hearing people say like, I feel like you just said things that I wanted to say and I didn't know how to. And I didn't even know I was like allowed to. And I mean, I'm biased, but I think that pleases the Lord's heart. Yeah.
Tell us about a couple of your songs that, if you'd be willing to share, that come out of your lived experience. I'm sure all of your songs come out from your lived experience. Maybe it's a silly question, but
That's not a silly question.
Well, one song that in particular that I'm thinking about is a song called "The Meantime." So I'm just pulling up the lyrics here. The verse starts with, "I think about Joseph and the waiting he did. He kept his heart pure, and for the first half of his life, he had nothing to show for it." You go on to talk about, "I think about Sarah and the desert in her womb, that when her husband came home saying, 'God has promised,' it must have felt cruel. And the meantime is where I'm living now, and I confess I don't know how to wait. You say it will be better than the little plans my fickle heart can make. But it's hard to give that reverence when I have no frame of reference for it. You're saying there's much hope in this, but right now, hoping sure feels dangerous. Yeah, right now, hoping sure feels dangerous." Like that is honest. So take us into the mind of Joshua Leventhal and where these songs come from.
Yeah, that one actually started. I started writing it in the church office. I think it was late. I think it was between rehearsals, or like between office hours and going into a rehearsal at my last church. And the reason like that I actually started writing that song is funny because now to me it feels trivial. But I remember Matt Maher saying when he wrote "Your Grace Is Enough," like that song came out of like getting his heart broken, and that gave me a lot more freedom because like sometimes the pain I've expressed has come from heartbreak. And in the meantime, actually, it was one of those songs, basically in the sense of like, so I'm almost 35 now. I got married 3 years ago, and it's one of the most beautiful outworkings of God's grace in both mine and my wife's life that we've ever experienced. Just deeply redemptive. But there was a lot of waiting and a lot of me feeling like, I guess my soul just doesn't fit somebody else's because this just does not seem to work. And I'd been to a place where I finally was like, okay, God, I think you've wrestled some things out of me. I think that I'm in a good heart posture. Because the other thing that was weird was I was at a mega church from 2018 to 2021, still single, and like trying to date in that environment when you're that public a figure was like really hard and weird. And so I'd kind of come to this place where like, God, I think I'm ready. I think you're in this place. And then this situation happened where I thought, okay, this seems like the answer to prayer. This seems like why I've had to wait this long. And it turned out to be like one of the hardest, most like it was probably the most damaging relationship I'd ever experienced. Um, and it just felt like that sense of, okay, maybe what felt like a promise was just me in my own head, and I'm just like crazy. And like literally all of that kind of came out of that. I think for me, a lot of times imagery doesn't have to be one-to-one. And that's where like a lot of art gets really bad. It's like, no, my heart does feel like a barren womb. My heart does feel
Mm,
uh like I've like just, man, the psalmist, like, surely I've kept my heart pure in vain. Cause I had, like, that was something that was really hard for me. It's like,
mm,
it just really resonated with, like, I see all these people making all these compromises in relationship and in holiness and stuff. And I'm not. And this is really killing me that like I'm doing all this and it's not leading to anything.
mm,
And man, I found out that just like he was keeping me from what I thought I wanted. And I don't know how his sovereignty works in terms of that kind of stuff. Sometimes people, I think, can get too spiritual about like, you know, just the process of dating and that kind of thing. Like, where it matters, but at the same time, I'm like, man, I see his hand just like completely taking me to a different place. But I think with that, like, you know, you use these images where it's like, hey, even if the person doesn't like I mean, like the chorus of that song, like right now, hoping sure feels dangerous. It's like I'm scared to try to like trust you with this, because doing so,
mm,
like, I know it's what you call me to, but I think the goal is that, like, hey, we would resonate with something that even if it's outside of our experience. It's like, I'm not a woman. I haven't experienced the feeling of like not having a child at that point in my life. But that like there are ways to invite people into experiences where they say, yeah, me too, even when they haven't gone through that exact thing. uh,
mm-hmm.
and I think that's the key, is like specificity can actually lead to a more shared universal experience.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, because your story, and then as you talk about Sarah there, like it's relatable. Like,
Hmm.
I think I think what you're speaking about is very true. Like, sometimes as Christians, I think we can come off as like, okay, we believe, okay, I've got to have it all together. I've got to have it all figured out. Like, if I'm going to reach somebody with the gospel and they're going to, like, I have to figure it all out. And it's like, no, come on. Like, we serve an incredible savior who loves us. It's actually our inadequacy that makes us ready for our savior. Like, it actually is the prerequisite to needing him.
Hmm.
And what you're saying is, like, you could be honest in your experience. And then what you did is you took these biblical stories that, again, are not necessarily stories that people regularly reference, and you're pulling out the humanity in Joseph and Sarah in that song in particular, and relating to them in such a way that the listener, who's maybe familiar with these characters, may not be, is going, who are these people? And there's almost like this teaser to go and maybe even read their stories
Yeah.
to figure out, okay, what is going on here. Now, you told me by email you're embarking on this major biblical project as far as
Mhm.
writing. So why are biblical stories and the big biblical story so important to you in your lyricism and in your own writing process?
Yeah. I think God meets us in Revelation, depending on how you want to look at it, in a handful of ways. But what is the thing that we always test any form of revelation against? It's against His word, because that is the immovable object by which it goes, okay, like, God's spirit speaks and moves dynamically, but we, as those who see through a glass darkly, mess up our understanding of that all the time. Well, what do we need to do is to grapple with that. And I think, man, we have gotten to such a, like, we yada 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 scripture so hard. Like, it's like, if we've grown up in it, it's like, you know, and this is part of my thing for like with worship music, why I think cliches are so dangerous, is it's like after you've said or heard something X number of times, like, your brain no longer even processes the information. Like, it just is literally going through the motions. And so part of, for me, is like I don't necessarily like, I'm not for novelty where I say like, oh, I'm saying something completely new, but it's like, what if I drew your attention back to the same thing, but in a way you haven't heard it before? So I'm working on a project right now that is a multi-volume biblical concert record called Tapestry. That's Greek transliteration of the word tapestry. So it's just going to basically take us through Genesis to Revelation, all through POV songs, and all through
POV being point of view
yes,
for
point of
those
view.
that may not
So,
be
so,
familiar. Yeah.
so narrative lens, and it's not equally weighted. Like we have like in Genesis, like a number of things I'm going to hone in on very closely, and then like we get to the story of Israel, and it's like, there's no way I'm going to contain all of that in X number of
Mhm.
songs. So I'm trying to like, okay, like how do I get to the themes of these effectively, but basically to get people to go, where have I just taken for granted what this is actually saying? And kind of inviting them to really engage with it. Like, I think, we talk about what art, I think art, when done, like, if we talk about the utility of art, especially unto Jesus, it's like the holistic nature of it is like we are commanded to love the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength. And we as human beings tend to weight one of those things heavier than the other. Certain personalities are going to bend towards head, and they're only gonna think in terms of like doctrine as math, and they're gonna completely miss really the heart of God in stuff. And we see people get trampled on for that. And then we have entire other movements that are entirely heart, and they completely forsake the head, and you end up with like a complete compromise of truth. You end up with a lot of idolatry of making Jesus in our own image because of what we feel and what feels good. And what music can do at its best, and what I'm trying to do is like, okay, if I can marry lyrics and melody and chord in such a way that it brings all of those things together. And so hopefully this is a way to actually, like, I almost kind of want to treat it like a devotional experience. And I have some long-term plans for what that could look like. But basically just being a way of like, what are the theses of each moment that we're talking about? And like, how do I bring that to bear? And there's a song I wrote years ago. I released it as a single. I'll be redoing it for this project, but it's called Goliath, and it's just kind of from the perspective of David. And I think it's partly because we like yada 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 David a lot. And when you're a
Mm.
worship leader, you get to hear like uh, all the time, like how you have the heart of David and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, David had a pretty flawed heart. um, and yet he was still a man after God's own heart. And so how do I bring all of that in? And so that song kind of almost became a case study of what does it look like to really examine self, to look at it through that lens. And yeah, there's in the verse of that song, and it says, the youngest of seven, no one was ever looking at me except for the Almighty, staring right through my chest cavity. The prophet man said, God looked in my heart and saw a king, but I know my heart well, and I never quite like what I see.
Mm.
And uh, we should all be able to go, yeah, that's me. And if we don't, I think we're fooling ourselves.
Mm.
I think that like, yeah, like to what you were saying about like trying to have it all together. I think there's oftentimes a sense in which we think that by not being honest with ourselves or others, that we are kind of holding to faith in some kind of way, when it's like God knows what we're thinking and feeling better than we do. And if we're not honest with him about like, hey, like I actually don't feel like I can trust you right now, even when I know I'm supposed to. If we can't say that to him, like he knows that, and we're just fooling ourselves. But I think when we actually acknowledge it, we're actually inviting him into a place where he can do that.
Mm.
I think truth, I think faith, I think hope. Like, because like my hope would be like, okay, these songs bear resemblance to Lamentations, but they don't end dour. They don't end from a place of like, they might end from a place of unresolved, but they don't end from a place of like sadness or misery. That
Mm.
they do arrive at hope, but that the hope is savvy. The hope isn't naive to
Right.
what life actually feels like, to what people actually feel like. And I think that's like, honestly, like almost the pastoral nature of what I try to do. It's like, is that people go, I'm being seen right now, and not by Josh. I'm being seen by my Father, who loves me enough to give this language that then I can come to him honestly. And
Mm-hmm.
and so my hope for this project would be, this would be a way for people to actually engage with scripture like they never have before, where it's okay, I don't know how to, I was fortunate to go to Bible school and major biblical studies and get like in-depth unpacking of not just books, but themes and movement and meta narrative. And not everybody gets those opportunities. And so what is something that could actually help invite people into the story to help them see better, where they go, oh, I haven't actually even thought about it like this. But
Hmm.
that examination, that reckoning could actually lead to a deeper life in Christ. And so, yeah, I'm very excited about it. It doesn't fit the Spotify model at all. It's not singles
Hmm.
based. It's a concept record where everything is like interconnected, but I'm very excited for it.
Talk to us about how art, creativity, we have been created by the creator. We have been, I believe, commissioned to go and to create, to take the raw materials of the planet and make beautiful things
Mhm.
alongside our king and our master. How does this connect with non-Christians? The theme of
Mhm.
this podcast, it's called The Sowers, that as followers of Jesus, we're invited to sow the gospel in the places we live, work, learn, and play. And I think probably one area that at times is untapped is the creative, artistic space. I remember years ago, the church I planted was part of a family of churches called the Soma family
Mhm.
of churches, and groups of missional communities on mission together to particular places and particular people. And I remember in the early days of hearing stories out of Soma and Tacoma that one missional community was made up of musicians,
Mhm.
and they got to know the artists in their city, non-Christians and Christians alike. And sort of like a book club, they said, hey, let's all write songs based upon biblical stories. And
Yeah.
then what ended up happening was there was an open mic night, and this group showed up, and non-Christians had written stories about David, about different people within the biblical story, and said, hey, as they introduced their songs, hey, I'm part of this writing group, and
Yeah.
not a Christian, but it's a pretty compelling, big book. And here's a
Mhm.
story about what I imagine, David was experiencing at
Yeah.
this point. And it actually became a way that the story of Christ and the gospel was being sown into those people's lives. And I heard stories of a number of artists coming to know Christ out of that. I mean, that's just one example of the ways artistry and creativity and songwriting can connect with so many. But for you, what is the vision for the music beyond the Christians that will hear this, but also as a way of being a sower through lyric writing, music writing, songwriting?
Man, there's so much to unpack there. First off, you mentioned taking the raw materials and making something beautiful. Have you read Madeline L'Engle, like Walking on Water?
No.
Because what you're describing is exactly she's the author of A Wrinkle in Time, but
Mm,
she wrote, I think, the definitive treatise, as far as I'm concerned, around faith and art. It's beautiful.
wow.
And she talks about our work imitating the divine by drawing cosmos from chaos. That's how we partner with God in this. And she has this really fascinating piece early in the book where she puts Christian in quotation. She goes, Christian art is art, painting is painting. If it's bad art, it's bad religion, no matter how pious the subject.
Wow.
Um, and man, that resonates with me. I can sound like a bad guy, but I find bad Christian art so offensive. Um,
Mm,
and I think part of it is have this like litmus test that is oh, it's if it's consecrated to Jesus, it's immune from criticism. It's inherently okay. When we're not even interrogating the question of is this honoring? Is this honoring to God by being its best, and is it honoring to our humanity by reflecting it? And I kind of am of the opinion that even if somebody doesn't understand the language necessarily, they should be able to look what we do and it passes the litmus test of being good art. If it
mm,
doesn't, like, I was fortunate. So in 23, I was nominated for a Juno. And I was at the awards, and at my table was a comedian. And he had brought a friend. They were both French Canadian. And really nice guys, pretty crass but nice guys. And afterwards, weeks later, one of them found me on Facebook and messaged me and just said, "Hey, just want you to know, I found your music, and I don't know Jesus, but man, this feels real.
mm.
This feels," and I'm like, that is like my deepest heart, I think, because it goes the other way, right? Like, we don't,
Yeah.
I don't ascribe to Justin Vernon's worldview, and that doesn't mean that Bon Iver can't like move me to my core and even
Yeah.
stir me towards God. Like
Hmm.
I can experience and know, and so much of our work now is like, okay, all these people writing songs are just writing songs based on other worship songs, other Christian songs, and so it becomes so like for lack of a better word, inbred. Like it's just so derivative. Where it's like, hey, there's this whole world open to you that you can like be the bringing in. And I think even if a non-Christian listens to this and goes, hey, I don't get this language. It sounds like, yeah, just like Old Testament-y or whatever to me.
Yeah.
But it resonates like it was written by a person. This is like, that to that point of like, okay, if Jesus is living out the fullness of what it means to be human. And that's actually what we aspire to, that like actually to be more like God is to be more like Jesus, and being more like Jesus is like, this is what true humanity looks like. And it's not just based around sin, like that we don't just talk about humanity in terms of our sinfulness. It's like there's a better way. Then people should go to us like, you're the most person-y person I've ever met. We should not feel devoid or and that's what I think with so many Christian movies is it's like you're saying that God. The reason I would say like that this isn't just like harmless is because if we're saying the gospel works, like this is the most beautiful thing that has happened in the history of existence, that God would put on scene. He'd become a baby, and he would, in complete injustice to him, open his hands and say, you can take me and I'll die for what you deserve. And that offers us the opportunity to be reconciled in a way that is unfathomable to what we deserve. And then you present that message spoken to by these like breathing things that don't resemble humans at all. Like it's so scripted, and the acting is poor, and the craft isn't there. And it's like there's just this disconnect. I'm a lifelong martial artist, and when I see in martial, like a keto demonstration where the person is not moving and like they're just like a static person they're demonstrating, it's like, well, does this actually work? Because it's not an actual live environment. I want to know what works on people who are trained killers, who actually know what they're doing. And so it's like, this has got to work for the person who lost a baby, whose husband abandoned them, who, have gone through incredible church hurt, but also for the people who like have done that and they don't know that they can turn to God because they don't know him. For all of those people, this should resonate where they go, I know something is being called to in me in this. And so I think that there's just an opportunity to show people to enter the Christian life is not to abandon what it means to be human. It's to actually live into it. And I think we almost inherently know this, not in the music space. We know this in like the literature space. We look at like the giants. We look at Chesterton, Lewis, MacDonald, Bonhoeffer. It's like that when these guys talk, when they write, you can feel the way in which they have tapped into just wonder and beauty. And we know that that's what we're capable of. And people would yes and amen that, and then they settle for so much less in what they make. Mm-hmm. So anyways, rant over.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm really connecting with that because I mean, I think for years, especially, well, there was, and I'm imagining there still is, although it seems less prevalent now, but the Christian subculture, something would come out and then, in mainstream culture. And then, within 6 months, there was this Christian alternative version that was really, really bad or really, really poor. Or I remember walking through, certain kids ministry spaces and, they'd taken, the posters that are on the wall are, Disney movies renamed to fit something else. And I mean, you can understand why there is a market for that, but you're right. It doesn't tap the enormous potential that is available to us in Christ by his Spirit to chart a new path for others to see the beauty. And it's interesting that you mentioned artistry and people listening. Like I think about Bon Iver, and maybe you could go back to, some of his first albums and share what the lyrics are of those songs, but it's actually the instrumentation and his brilliance of layering things. It's less about the lyrics, and someone listens to it and goes, wow, this is amazing. And then there's lyrics, but I don't really know what they are. And what you're, I'm sure that like I've listened to your music, you care deeply about your lyrics, but there is something that says like, is this listenable and is it interesting? I mean, you spent a little bit of time at Hillsong. I would imagine you've listened to Joel Houston's new album, The Profound Foolishness of. Like I think it's phenomenal. And he put an interview together and kind of said, listen, I listen to a lot of secular or non-Christian music that moves me in honoring our Creator. And so I wanted to create something that was unique and fleshed out a little bit more of my creative side
Totally.
than otherwise. And I'm sure it will draw people in. What is your hope for music and for the sowing of the gospel through music and in the future? I think specifically in the church in Canada, but in the
Mhm.
music world, I'm sure you're also hoping that this also grabs hold of the US audience as well.
Yeah. Well, it's funny actually. My U.S. audience is actually much larger than my Canadian audience,
Mm,
which is just a result of Spotify. That's just
right.
how it's unfolded. But I love Canada. My wife loves Canada. We like, even as I tour the states, we want to stay here. Which is like, I'm a dual citizen, which is a rare thing. So,
Yeah.
it's actually very hard to just be an artist to just be in Canada. But there's nothing saying you can't be based out of here and then go elsewhere too. In terms of hope, like, man, from like I don't care about fame, like in the sense of, man, like you can get the most successful you're ever going to be, and you're still going to be forgotten in 2 generations tops. Like that's the most,
Mm,
like, even if you're the most famous person, like you're going to be forgotten in 2 generations tops. So what's the point? Like, that's like, I think Ecclesiastes makes that very clear. Under the sun,
hmm.
there's no
Yeah.
point. Above the sun, however, in the Eternal's perspective, there's something very different. And so I've already gotten to live out some of my dreams in the sense of like, I remember John Macmillan talking about when he wrote How He Loves and
Yeah.
what happened in people's lives through that song. And I've already gotten to experience that. Like I already get
Mm,
messages from strangers who I don't know, where I get to hear of how God met them in unspeakable pain. That is so beautiful that I've been releasing music since 2017, and that will, I think, till the day I die, be the most important thing that ever happens in my
mm,
career, is that. But then, like, I think, like, hope wise is like, I would love to just continue to partner with other artists, because there's a whole indie scene of people who are doing really interesting things that, a lot of people just don't know that it's out there. They're only aware of like kind of the market force stuff that shows them like, okay, this is what Christian music is, but there's a whole other space that's beautiful. um and I would love to work more with some of those people. I already get the chance to some extent, but like, to see that grow, to see it flourish, to see it take more hold of the Christian imagination, like that it wouldn't be something that only a select number of people know about. Pragmatically, I'd love to make sure that I can actually like live off of what I do.
hmm.
We live in this weird time where like it's both possible to do it indie and to like make um like you're not in the chokehold of labels and certain industry systems anymore, but at the same time, like streaming has also devalued music so extensively
Mm,
that it is this weird trade-off. So just like basically to go like, hey, can me and my wife, through, because she's an incredible painter. She does just and it's abstract. That's what's wild, is that like her work is, I think, like unapologetically Christian, but abstract. There's nothing representational. She's not drawing pictures of Jesus or the disciples or anything like
yeah.
that. But you
Yeah.
look at that and you go, man, the hope of the gospel is in that.
Yeah.
So with what we do, and we get to actually do stuff together, which is so beautiful. She'll do my album art and that kind of thing. But where we can just like, hey, can we minister to the world through what we do in whatever ways that looks like, to whatever depth, like, because the depth is the most beautiful
Yeah.
thing, like more than like breadth, because you'll never be the best in breadth. Like there's always going to be somebody who has reached more people. There's always going
Mm,
to be that. But man, getting to know that, like, that's something that I think is so special in the Christian space, is like, and I'm sure it does, like, like I'm sure people would tell Coldplay, music changed my life. But when you know that somebody is communing with God through something you've made, that is
mm,
so profound. And I say that with zero conceit. That is just like, when it's like, don't let it go to your head. It's like, I can't, because it's like, how could I like, how could I claim credit for
yeah.
that? um so yeah, and then yeah, so I just hope more comes. I just like want to see
Hmm.
it grow in the church would, and the church wouldn't settle, that the church wouldn't settle
Mm,
for a small imagination around art,
hmm.
and the role art plays in worship too.
Hmm. Well, Josh, God has met me through your music. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you for that, and also for the many artists that you will inspire. I don't know what you make of Forrest Frank, but my kids are really into him. He writes very catchy songs. But
You
we were
certainly
at a
do.
recent Forrest Frank show, and it was actually really cool. he put up on the screen, like he pulled up his program that he uses to mix music. And he talked about how when he was growing up, he didn't have like a Christian pop artist that was really someone that was inspiring for him that he could look to.
Yeah.
And he shared about how, hey, this is how I make my music. And he was really, I think, modeling just this beautiful thing of, hey, if you're out there and you're into like doing this, like do it. And so you are totally in that space of writing beautiful art, beautiful music, beautiful lyricism, and you're going to inspire, I believe, the next generation of artists to pick up, or to take the baton and to continue to write and to continue to create. So thank you for what you're doing, and I'll put links in the show notes to all your music and where it can be found.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt.